toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Tonight our theme is our next step. And this topic was inspired by Pir Vilayat, who oftentimes, at least when I would meet with him for guidance, he would say, he wouldn't tell me what to do, but he would say, well, I can see your next step, and then give some suggestions. So sometimes we think of our spiritual path as being something just predetermined. We say, well, I've fallen off the path, but get back on the path, as if there's some prefigured way that we're supposed to arrive at some destination that we have in our mind, some final end. But after a time, I think we discover, well, there really is not a final end, and furthermore, it would not be desirable if there ever could be such a thing. The whole point is the journey. In fact, Murshid says that when someone takes initiation, they are joining a caravan of kindred-seeking souls in this life and which continues beyond this life, but each soul has its own path to go on, but they're traveling in good company. That's what the journey is about. And the journey is about discovering what our next step is at different times in our life. So the Sufis talk about a hal state, H-A-L, which is like a temporary high. It's kind of a sneak preview of a state that maybe you'll be in further down the road. But more often we're in a maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, and maqam means station. So in a particular station in our life, we have lessons to learn. It's part of our natural evolution of our soul. And we get all the time we need to learn those lessons. And sometimes we aren't too happy about it, because if we don't get it, the lessons seem to have a way of repeating over and over and over again. And we're thinking, why is this happening to me? This must be my karma. This must be because of something I did in a past life, when in actuality our soul and life itself is trying to help us understand something that will enable us to move on to the next station and to the next station. And these transition points are not linear. It's not continuous. And we can all think of times in our life where sometimes it's the periods of upheaval, sometimes it's a trauma, a tragedy, an illness, a loss. Sometimes it's good things that happen. You have a job that's much better than what you had before, or you are in a relationship that is much better than a previous relationship, and so on. But there are opportunities for transformation. So, how do we relate to these lessons that life is presenting us with? I'd like to read you a few quotes. And it was interesting because I had never researched this before. I have on my computer all the collected volumes of Hazrat Inayat and Pir Vilayat and so on, and you can put in keywords to search. So I wasn't surprised when I put in Next Step with Pir Vilayat. There were a whole bunch, but I thought Hazrat Inayat, I don't know if I'm going to find very many. There were 89 different ones, and it was really fascinating. And I'll just give you a taste of some of them, because he talked about stages of growth on the spiritual path and what the next step looks like when you move from this one to this one and this one to this one. So let me see if I can find you some. The nature of life is such that it easily excites the mind and makes one unhappy in a moment's time. It makes people so confused they do not know where to take the next step. Contrary to this, the mystic stands still and inquires of life its secret, And from every experience, from every failure or success, the mystic learns a lesson. Therefore, failure and success both are profitable to a mystic. When one goes still further on the path of intuition, one comes to what is called revelation, which means that everything and every being reveals to one its secret. Such a one feels that every leaf has a tongue to tell its legend. He or she finds that every soul is a living book which reads its own story aloud. He or she finds that every condition of life is turned inside out before them the moment they look at it. They feel that they are at home on earth and in heaven, and that both the here and the hereafter become manifest to their soul. So much depends on our journey, on our outlook, how we relate to what is going on. And very commonly, because we're human, our way of relating to difficulties is a reactive way, to push away from it, to try to force something to change, to just dig in our heels and get caught up in a separate sense of self that is far from being in a harmonic relationship with what's going on. But I've said this many times before, every circumstance, without exception, is a potential portal to the sacred, no exceptions. Now, that does not mean that every situation is wonderful. Look in the world right now, there are horrible, horrendous situations that definitely need to change. It's not okay just to go, well, I guess this must be part of some plan. We'll just watch what's going on. So we do what we can to make this world a better place that we're in. But what we do have control over is our way of relating to what's going on, our way of understanding what's going on. Now I want to read you some quotes from Pir Vilayat. And as you know, and as many people who may be listening to this recording later may know, the Sufis work with divine names, which are called wazaif. A single one, it means practice, wazifa. And so here's what Pir Vilayat has to say about that. We have to make a bridge between what's happening to us as we sit, repeating a wazifa, and our situations out there. We could do it after repeating our wazifa. That's the instant in which we make a pledge, and that would make all the difference in our life. To bring about change in our life, we have to open a new chapter, a departure from the previous one. It's a quantum leap, not a slow transit. It's our pledge that opens the new chapter. That's what the Sufis call maqam, which means a station. Our pledge opens the door to the next step being revealed. We have to do something. We can't just wait for it to be revealed. We have to make a pledge. A pledge is a departure from the past, like saying, I won't do this anymore. It's a definite departure. The way for this to be real is to imagine a situation in which that particular wazifa or quality makes a difference. The next step is the aha moment, when all of a sudden you grasp the divine intention, not the programming. The intention is beyond the programming. So this is really important and really interesting, because sometimes in spirituality, mystical traditions as well as religion, we think, well, it's just all laid out. God has this plan and it's just going to come to pass, and we'd like to get with the program, our lives will be better if we do. And what Pir Vilayat is saying, no, it's not fixed. There's an intention. Even the divine being has an intention for possibilities of what might become, but the divine needs beings in manifestation in any of the realms. But we're human, so we'll pick the human realm to establish a relationship with the divine, both in the transcendent direction, but also the divine as the divine is expressed in all the names and forms in manifestation in our world. And that's how what started as a divine intention evolves. Pir Vilayat says, you grasp beingness. I don't want to say the being of God, that is a projection. You grasp that all is one being. You don't reduce a being to its body. It is the mind, the emotion, the presence, the attunement, the intention. Consciously, that sudden click of intelligence triggers off an outburst of light, a clarity of awakening. And here's Pir Vilayat in full form. There is a breakthrough of light right down to your aura, light that reaches right into the stars. The stars are beings, not little bits of light in the sky. They are beings of light. While the photons of your aura are bombarding the stars, your being is connected with the beings of the archangels of the stars. There is communication at all levels. There is light upon light, and life communicating life to light, and the ecstasy of creation, and you are part of that wonder. And Pir Vilayat so often would talk about how we can take our problems and use them as means of transformation. Grasping what is trying to transpire in the problem rather than that which appears. There are many things which are trying to transpire. Let's earmark them. At least one of them might be about determining what the issues are that enacted in that scenario. For example, the whole problem is there so that eventually truth will become known. That's the issue that is enacted in this problem. Or the issue is compassion or orderliness as opposed to randomness or chaos. Mastery. There are all kinds of issues we might try to identify. You could say that it gives you a sense that there is something trying to transpire in circumstances which make up your problem. If you just judge the problem from its face value, you haven't really grasped the problem, because that's a very perfunctory way of looking at things. There are deeper issues. So Pir Vilayat would often talk about us examining ourselves and ask ourselves, well, what quality am I being challenged in right now in my life? And it could be mastery, it could be compassion, it could be truthfulness, it could be harmony, it could be any number of things. And so life is presenting us with a circumstance, with an opportunity for us to manifest something that perhaps we didn't even think we had any of that quality. But we all inherit the seeds of all the divine qualities, and some of us naturally have some of these qualities much more manifest and easily accessible than others. They're more natural to our personality. Others we have to cultivate, just like a gardener might have an easy time planting certain seeds in their garden, but if they want to grow some other ones, they might have to change the pH of the soil. They might have to put in nutrients that are needed. They may have to water more, water less, give certain fertilizer, more sunlight, less sunlight. So they have to create the conditions that will enable that quality to come forth. What quality would we like to have independent of what's needed? So maybe life is challenging us in compassion, and we recognize that's something we want to work on, and we have opportunities for that. But we go, well, that's okay, but besides that, I would like to be a more creative person. Well, that's another divine quality, creativity. So we have ways of working with our practices and our situations in life that help to foster that quality coming forth. So again, sometimes in working with a spiritual practice, initially we might think of it as, well, it's something out there, like a medicine you pull off the shelf, and I'm going to take some doses of it, aka repetitions of it, and all of a sudden it's going to do something to me. Well, you got to start somewhere, but that's the most basic way of trying to work with a practice. But if instead you feel like, well, this quality is really descriptive of a particular way of my relationship with the divine, and again, there's different directions, transcendent with the inner life, but also in my outer life. And so as I can access this quality and create ways for it to come out more, then it will become more natural to me, and it will blossom That's how you tend the soil, so to speak, for that quality to blossom in your being. And there's no quality that we can't develop in ourselves. There's no such thing as, well, you just don't have any of it. That's too bad. It's all latent. So we can take a situation that we're stuck in, and again, this is a method that Pir Vilayat would give over and over again. And initially, you might go, well, I just can't deal with this because I'm not a person who is, or who has fill in the blank with the quality. If only I had this, if only I had more patience, but I don't have patience. Forget it. There's nothing I can do about it, and I don't have the time to work on patience. Okay, well, but what you can do is you could ask yourself, well, who is a being? And it could be a great being, or it could be somebody you know, or a historical figure, a great scientist, musician, whatever it might be. And you can go, well, this person would have no trouble dealing with this situation because they are a very fill in the blank with the quality that you need person. And it's not too hard to imagine how they would deal with that circumstance. Let's say it's a difficult person you're having trouble with. Oh, they'd be perfect with this, but I could never be like that. So that's a starting point. Okay, and then Pir Vilayat like to talk about, well, what if you can you can imagine that you are that person dealing with that quality. So let's say if it's mastery, you can imagine being Shiva. Well, how would Shiva deal with this? Well, nobody's going to mess with Shiva, especially with those cobras around his neck. So you imagine that, okay, and you get to where you can do that, and then you go, well, okay, now let me imagine, I'm not Shiva, but let me imagine myself somehow having awakened this quality in my being that I didn't think I possessed, or not very much of, dealing with this situation, and you just visualize it. Imagination, you can think, it's kind of like a muscle of the mind, creative faculty of the mind, and you get to where you could imagine yourself doing that, even though a part of you is going, well, that's nice, but I couldn't, but my mind, I could. But you get to where you can really see that as a reality, and then you go, all right, next time I'm in this circumstance with this difficult person, I'm going to just pretend like I have all of this quality of this great being that I didn't think I had, and you act it out, and lo and behold, you discover that you do have this quality. And when you express it, your relationship to that circumstance will change. It doesn't mean magically the other person's going to be so nice and wonderful and loving. They might be just as difficult as they ever were, but your way of relating to them is going to change, and it's going to open up something. It's going to open up the possibility of a new station in your life, and it's going to change the atmosphere of that circumstance, whether or not the other person realizes that anything has changed, because now you are seeing past the surface appearance that they've gotten caught up in. They might be thinking, well, I'm just a miserable person and I don't like people, and then all of a sudden here's you coming along and you're not reacting to them the way people usually do, and it's perhaps going to plant a little seed in them that maybe something's different. Maybe it's not even at a conscious level. This other person sees something in me that I couldn't see, and perhaps it's real, and maybe it's a long time from then, but maybe that seed blossoms. So you can serve as a catalyst for helping to bring about transformation, but you're not trying to do anything to anybody. You're not trying to manipulate people. You are just trying to express something that is a natural part of your own being. So you could say in that circumstance, well, what's your next step? Well, your next step is finding a way of relating to a difficulty in your life that doesn't have the same outcome that it's had maybe 1,000 times before in similar circumstances. I want to branch off a different way. I want to try this out, and at first it's kind of tender, like a sapling that you've got to really take care of and maybe stake it up for a while. But after a while, it becomes, the expression alchemy is adamant. It becomes a natural part of your being, and now you have awakened that quality in yourself, which you have available to you from then on out. And you can do this with any of the qualities. So you can think of there's different directions of what our next step might be. And oftentimes what the next step is finding a transformational way of relating to a circumstance in your worldly life. Okay, and I bet we can all think of at least one thing that maybe could use a little WD-40, a little transforming. And so let's just try this very briefly. Think of a circumstance, and it could be a person, or it could be just something you've been wanting to do, but you just can't get yourself to do it, and you keep putting it off, or whatever. And so we're going to just kind of zoom through this, but at a later time you can spend some time with this, and those of you listening to this recording can also do this at another time and really give yourself an opportunity to make this become a reality. Okay, so first, think of something going on in your life that you would like to be different than the way that it is right now. And as you do this, ask yourself, well, what quality, if I had this particular quality, would enable me to bring about a change in this circumstance? And it could be any one of a number of things. Pick the adjective that fits with it. And the Sufis talk about 99 divine names. It could be just something that if you had this quality or property, it would really transform what would be going on. So first, just identify what would that quality be. And now think of a person. It could be someone you know, a historical figure, a master saint, a prophet, or some great being from the past, or it could just be an imagined person that you could just imagine having this quality in abundance, and picture them dealing with this circumstance and just relating to it in a very different way than perhaps you've been able to so far. And now imagine you're like an actor in a play, and so your role is to play this being that you've imagined handling the situation in a very wonderful way. So now you're this being, and see yourself portraying this being, manifesting this quality. And the last step is now realize that you couldn't imagine this great being having this quality. You couldn't imagine yourself pretending you're this being having this quality unless you also possessed this quality in your own being. And now visualize yourself in that circumstance, expressing a quality which now becomes something very natural to you. And allow yourself now to claim this quality as a part of your being, able to access it whenever needed, by just calling upon it. So this is one, you could say, direction of looking at our next step, relating to something in our manifest life. But sometimes our next step is we're undergoing a period, the Sufi terms are fana, which the literal meaning, F-A-N-A, is shattering, and the conventional meaning is annihilation, but I like to think of it as a phase transition point between one maqam and the in-between state before the next maqam comes to be manifest. And we're in sort of a hatching period where it's not clear what's going to come from it. It's analogous to the caterpillar being in the chrysalis. It's the state in-betweenness. So when we find ourselves in that state, what's human nature? Well, human nature is to go back to the familiar. Human nature is to go back to what we are accustomed to. Well, I got this maqam down fine. Why should I want to go anyplace else? Because I got the hang of it, and let's just make more decorations and make it look nice and whatever. But no, I don't want any more transformation. That's messy. Yes, it is. And if we could totally foresee what was going to emerge, it would not be a genuine transformation. Because genuine transformation is, it's like electrons. If you remember back to some science you may have had, when an electron gets excited and goes to a higher orbital, it's not like you can watch it moving from the first orbital to the second orbital. It can't be in between. It's either at the first orbital or it's at the second orbital. There's not a continuity of that. So there's not a continuity in this transition. So sometimes the next step is allowing ourselves to be in a state of transition without trying to hold on to how things have been. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. The more you try to hold on to the way that things have been, it seems like it just keeps getting yanked away from you, and the more you try harder, the worse that things get. And you might be thinking, why is the universe doing this to me? The universe is not doing anything to you. In fact, the nature of your soul is to try to help you let go so you can come to a higher state of being. You can't hold on to this and be in this higher state. You have to let yourself go through this period of transformation, and it's not defined from the get-go what you're going to be like when you get to the other side of it. But I've said this before, if I could wish for one quality, if I only had one quality I could wish for someone to have in the spiritual journey, it would be confidence. And what does that mean? It's like confidence in that everything is moving. Sometimes I call this, I'll do a little segue, a principle of existence I really believe in, which I call the optimization of light. That the nature of light is always seeking to move into a greater capacity for the expression of that very light, more so than what was there before. So it's like natural forces of growth, natural forces of transformation. So if you believe that we exist in a world in which that's just a natural part of life, that we are going to, if we don't resist it and don't try to hold on to a state that it's time to let go of that, then we will come out to a different place in which there's more freedom, more possibilities, more of what we're really looking for that we couldn't see from where we were there before. So sometimes, in this case, the remedy is not necessarily to pick some quality and try to put it in there and whatever. Sometimes the remedy is just to trust and know that you can never lose the essential nature of your being. So if you're familiar with the I Ching, the Chinese book of changes, one of my favorite little snippets of that is if something is yours, you can't lose it, and if it's not yours, you can't keep it, so why worry? Pretty profound. So sometimes and we're never going to go through this process of transformation at a greater rate than we're able to deal with. So, I mean, there's sometimes that we just need to pull back and go to what's familiar, which is okay. But a lot of times when we're undergoing these experiences, there can be some anxiety that goes with it. And if we allow that anxiety to get magnified, we go, well, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to lose myself. You can't lose yourself. But eventually, over time, and it may take a long time on the journey, we get to a place where we can welcome these transition places. And I've used this analogy before, like the hawk riding the thermal updraft. This is an updraft of the soul that's moving towards a higher state of being, and you can welcome it, and you can release with gratitude the makam that you were in previously and all the lessons that life presented you with, exactly what you needed to learn, what you needed to learn, so you can move on your journey to greater and greater fulfillment. So, as I was preparing for this class, just this thought came to me out of the blue, so to speak, and it was that our next step is simultaneously God's next step. So it's not just, we tend to think here we are and we're moving along this spiritual path and we're trying to get up to this divine state or where we originated from or whatever. But the Sufis talk about awakening of divinity in life. So that awakening of divinity, we initially think, well, it's just about me. It's about what I realize on the spiritual journey. It's about my hope to reach a state of illumination, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. But it's just all happening on this end. And meanwhile, the divine side, however you relate to that, is just perfect. It's unchanging. Nothing happens on that. It's just all happening here. And somehow I'm going to get closer to the divine side of things. But what came to me many years ago was the realization that everything is in a state of evolution, and first of all, we could never be separated from what we think of as the divine. What we think of as the divine is undergoing evolution just as we are. And how does the divine evolve? The divine evolves through the knowledge the divine has, and I'll read you a quote if I can find it in here. God has a knowledge of God's own self only through manifest beings, the wisdom that's gained in life. So, and we tend to think of and I'd say this is the traditional way that God or the divine is described as being omniscient. Well, God knows everything. Well, implied in that is, well, there can't be any change in that, because if God knows everything, it's just all sitting somewhere. But I don't believe that. I think, if anything, you could say, well, what we think of as God in that sense is the current state of what God is able to know about God's own self through manifestation, but everything in manifestation is always in a state of flux and evolution, and so the divine must also always be in this state of flux and evolution, and we contribute to that. So, this is kind of a long segue, when our next step is to allow ourselves to be in this in-between state, we're actually giving a gift to the divine. We're allowing the divine to also be in this in-between state, so that something that is gained by both sides, our human side and divine side, in that indeterminate state, is going to birth something that could never come from either side by itself. And so what's the gift that we give? The gift that we give is allowing that process to unfold. So when I was in my psychology practice, a lot of times I would use this kind of silly analogy about people being in a hurry and wanted to speed things up. Well, Dr. Weiner, how about if I come for therapy 5 times a week? Will I get to my goal 5 times as quick? And I said, let me ask you something. I would say to them, you've got a recipe for a cake, and it says to bake at 350 for an hour. What's going to happen if you bake it at 700 for 30 minutes? Nothing that you would want to eat. Probably your smoke detectors are going to go off. So there's a natural process to things, but if we can welcome that, I mean, there's no hurry. We have, Hazrat Khan said something very interesting. He said that there's no genuine desire of the heart that isn't eventually fulfilled, if not in this life, then beyond. And that doesn't mean we should just have this laissez-faire attitude and go, well, why should I work on myself because I have forever? Well, true, but a lot more can be accomplished when we're in this human form than perhaps afterwards. May take a lot longer. So related to this was another thought that came to me. And I'm paraphrasing this, there's a line in the Quran that says something like, everything fades away except his face, which is very beautiful.
Except
his face, the face of God. Yeah. It's another way of saying that ultimately there's nothing but God, which is true. La ilaha illallahu, Sufis say, the zikr. But the traditional way, and the way that I had always understood this, was the usual way that, eventually everything in manifestation is transitory, it's temporal, it will fade away, and our physical body will fade away, and eventually our angelic body will fade away, and so on, and then it will just all go back to God, just to the one. But what I saw as another way of perhaps looking at this beautiful phrase from the Quran, everything fades away except his face, is considering that when we're in our usual conditioned state of being in the world, in life, I've talked about this before in other classes, it's as if we're living in a simulation. We're on the holodeck of the Enterprise. It's not the true reality, but it's a greatly constricted mode of perception that is the norm for just about everybody in the world. So it's unquestioned, and someone might think you're nuts if you said, well, there's anything beyond this or different from this. What do you mean? I believe in what I can see and touch and so on. But there's a deeper way of experiencing this same reality that we're in, which includes the physical world. It doesn't mean we're just going to disappear into some subtle realm. In this very physical realm that we're in, there's a way of beingness and relationship in which there's a clarity. So we're able to experience ourselves and what we are in relationship with as one face of the divine experiencing another face of the divine in manifest form. And so a totally different way of thinking about everything fades away except his face is, what fades away is the distortions and limitations. It would be like you have a telescope or microscope and you're adjusting the focus, or a radio receiver, and you adjust it to have just total clarity, and now you're experiencing a state of clarity of being. And probably most, if maybe everyone who is listening to this class has had, even if brief experiences in your life when you've felt like that. It could be somewhere beautiful in nature where time just seemed to stand still, or you were listening to some incredible music or work of art, or listening to poetry, or engaging in a process, movement, singing, whatever it might be, where you just felt like so connected with everything else. So if you've ever had an experience like that, I would say that everything faded away except his face. Only his face is everywhere. Everywhere is the face of the divine. And this is like what the quote I read you from Hazrat Khan. I'll read it again. When one goes still further on the path of intuition, one comes to what is called revelation, which means that everything and every being reveals to one its secret. Such a one feels that every leaf has a tongue to tell its legend. He or she finds every soul is a living book which reads its own story aloud. He or she finds that every condition of life is turned inside out before them the moment they look at it. They feel that they are at home on earth and in heaven, and both the here and the hereafter become manifest to the soul. And Murshid goes on to say, Hazrat Khan, talking about the different steps. First step is, beginning of intuition is to understand the symbolical meaning of different things. And the next step is to express things symbolically. It is in itself a divine art. The next step is contemplation. That is, to be able to retain an idea which raises one's consciousness from the dense world. The third stage is meditation, and that is to purify oneself, to free oneself, and to open oneself to the light of truth in order that it may abide in one's spirit. And the fourth step is realization. Then the mystic is no longer the knower of truth, but is truth itself. So this is the deeper meaning of what the Sufi message is about that Hazrat Khan brought to the West in the early 1900s, the awakening of humanity to its divinity. That every person is a unique expression of the divine being. And then something I've said many times before from Ibn Arabi, every soul has access to a unique part of the divine wisdom that no other soul ever can or could or will have access to. And to me, this is the ultimate ennobling of the human soul and the ultimate antidote to low self-esteem. So if someone really takes this to heart, how could you feel bad about yourself if you believe, even if you don't know how you're going to be able to express this, but if you trust that it's there, that you have a priceless gift that Buddha didn't have, that even Christ couldn't have, because each of them had their own unique expression of the divine wisdom, but you have your own access to something, and in a sense, it's not as if it's sitting someplace waiting for you to discover it. I've used this analogy before. It's not like it's in the Akashic record library and you just have to find the right volume and have the right library card to check it out. It's that wisdom is created by your relationship with the divine, your unique expression of divinity in relationship to whatever way or ways that you have of relating to divinity, whether it's with other people, in nature, in your inner life. All of those combined, the fruit of all that, is kind of a cross-pollination that brings about a wisdom that could only come by what you uniquely contribute to that. And this is another way of thinking about dharma, which means our sacred duty or purpose in life, that our dharma is to bring that to fruition, to bring to life, bring to the divine that which can only come through us. And we might think, well, that just means I need to go off and meditate for 20 years on a mountain or whatever, or do this practice so many times. No, it's about you finding a way of engaging in your life that totally fulfills the deepest call of your heart and brings forth something that is a inestimable value to others. And it could be through any sorts of things. Hazrat Khan talks about different pathways in life. It talks about like the pathway of the business person, the philosopher, the scientist, the priest, the musician, anything you could think of. But it's like just where you feel you're being your truest, most natural self. And you're not trying to do something. You're not trying to convert anything. One wonderful thing Hazrat Khan said is that spirituality is a process of learning to become a natural human being. And I think, well, why do I have to work so hard to become a natural human being? Well, if you think about it, there's so much that is unnatural about our lives that a lot of times we don't take the time or give ourselves the opportunity just to be in a state of communion with whatever it is that we're experiencing, whether it's listening to a bird sing or looking at a flower or whatever it might be, or finding a way of relating to our day-to-day circumstances that are transforming, that are actually energizing rather than depleting. And again, it could still be the same difficult situation. Isn't going to magically fix it up, but if you find a different way of relating to that, this is the what the meaning is learning how to walk on water. This is learning how to not sink and get caught up in the innumerable ways there are to be caught up in circumstances and having good reasons and justifications for feeling the way that you do, but they're pulling you away from the state of interconnectedness with the one that we could never be separated from. The only way we were separated from is an illusion of the mind that we foster by our thoughts and is fostered by most people's way of being in the world. So why do we do practices? Well, practices, as Pir Vilayat would say, help us to free ourselves from our conditioning so we can more and more be able to experience something that's very natural to our being. And once we're able to do that more and more, then you don't have to work at it like you did before, because that becomes more and more of your default setting. And when you recognize that you've gotten caught up again, and it's human nature, we do get caught up again, over time it becomes easier and easier just to recognize that and just to go, okay, take a breath, let me realize the true nature of myself and the true nature of this circumstance. And that could include realizing that someone you're dealing with is caught up in their own frame of reference and they can't see their own unique, wonderful possibilities. But if you can see that in them, even if they can't see it, then your way of relating to them will change. And like I said, that may serve as a catalyst, and maybe 10 years from now something is triggered in them, but you don't have control over that, and that's not why you're doing it. But I sometimes like to think that we're all part of a giant cosmic neural network where each of the parts are nodes of conscious beings, and we can learn how to connect with this network. And Pir Vilayat will talk about first participate in the divine programming, but then, like that passage I read, he says you can go beyond that programming into opening up to possibilities that weren't there in the programming. They evolved to something that could not be foreseen because they were not predetermined, and they could not be foreseen by you or by however we think of the divine, and that's the wonder of it all. So, why don't we just take some time and sit with these ideas and feelings, and we'll have a simple instruction for this meditation, so close your eyes. And imagine for however many years that you've been on this world, you've been living out a script. And sometimes the Sufis call this the allegory of our soul. But perhaps a lot of the script you thought was just carved in stone, so to speak, like, well, this is just the way that I am, and this is the way that just things are going to be. But a wonderful Sufi hundreds of years ago said, oh man, I'll modernize what he said, oh man, oh woman, if you but knew that you are free. It's your thought of captivity that keeps you in chains. So imagine now, and that's the nice thing about imagination, we can imagine ourselves flying through the universe, but in this case, just imagine that you can release and free yourselves from past programs that have kept you from being your natural self. Kept you from being able to be in the world with a sense of awe and reverences. It's all an expression of the divine being. And some expressions are more awake and some less awake than others, but everything is in a process of its own awakening. Hazrat Khan said that ultimately every atom will have its moment of awakening. So just imagine yourself now letting go of these old patterns and programs, and you don't have to figure out something, because why would you have to figure out how to be natural? You're just allowing yourself to open into what is the natural state of your own being. So as Pir Vilayat said in a passage I read earlier about making a pledge, what's a pledge that you can make that will help you take the next step on your own path towards fulfillment, knowing that that fulfillment is not just for you alone, but is a benefit to all of existence and a benefit to the divine. May the blessings of God rest upon you. May God's peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore. Amen.